Are you saying you would have probably taken Kupp? Let's say you couldn't have traded out. Who would you have taken there?
I wouldn't have taken Kupp. I just can't draft the older players, and I think Cooper Kupp is good. I think he's going to have, I mean, when I say good, I mean really good, and it will have multiple more dominant seasons. But the risk there at that price with so many other guys is so great, and all we have to do is look back to a Michael Thomas to see that, like, the worst case scenario of it. But there's risk there, and there's just the other types of players. And this is one of the reasons why I think moving into round 3, 4, 5, like you've done, having multiple picks in those rounds, is just really the way to play it, because those types of guys have such huge value. The upside potential for them is extreme. They can score a lot of points for you. And one of the things I just think there in terms of Kyle Pitts, I like Mark Andrews even with the concerns, because he just is so good. And yet when you look at how close together they're going, even if it's a full round, and you think about where they are in their career trajectories, the potential for Pitts to be this massive win for you is still much, much greater than Mark Andrews. And I think that you're looking for that similar potential type of win late in round 2, in round 3, in round 4. We've talked a lot about how 2022 is going to be this really crazy, I think, fun season, because some elements of the running back dead zone and the sort of wide receiver golden tier are flipped. But when you're looking at Dynasty, that range in Superflex is so dynamic, and I think there are so many young wide receivers to be very excited about.
So you didn't answer the question. It sounds like you said you wouldn't take Kupp. It sounds like you wouldn't take Andrews either. So you can't trade out of the 211. Who are you drafting then?
I think I'm going to take Breece Hall, because I don't think that he's Jonathan Taylor, but I think he's better than people are giving credit for. I think that within that Jets offense, one of the things that we hear a lot is that a player is going to lose some touches. And it really does kind of depend on what touches they lose. That's going to bounce around some. So when we're looking at either the high value touches in the stealing signals tool, or you're looking at the running back expected points in the weekly stat explorer, when you're going to see some jumping around in terms of EP based on like just how valuable the specific touches are that Hall gets versus Carter, for example. But we're not looking for the running back to get 350, 400 touches anyway, right? And so if they have a solid second running back who can keep some of these drives going, if the wide receivers can be decent, if Zach Wilson can come around, I think you can play him. You can take the points. I think you're going to be able to move him. So I like that part of it. But if you gave me the option to trade down and take T. Higgins or Jaylen Waddle, that would be very hard to pass up as well.
I love hearing this stuff from you. I love my conversations with guys like Pat Kerrane, who teaches me a lot. Is you guys seem to be very aware of basically what if you're wrong on a player, what will his value be? And you mentioned this with Cooper Kupp. There are scenarios where if Cooper Kupp maybe gets hurt this year or is just comes down quite a bit in terms of his production, at his age, if he goes back to basically being the guy before 2021, or even somewhere in between 20 and 2021, so it's a little bit of a drop off from 2021, that you're going to lose a lot of dynasty value. Suddenly he's not what he is right now, Cooper Kupp, right? And so if you're wrong about Cooper Kupp continuing to be as good, and even if you're right, he basically just gains value or loses some more because he gets a year older. Like we were talking about the Travis Kelce types who, even as they're amazing, they're just getting older. But if you're wrong, basically, look at Stephon Diggs. Great example. Stephon Diggs had the incredible 2020. His 2021 is not as good, and his value drops accordingly. Still has a lot of value, and Stephon Diggs is still going to go very soon, probably in the startup. But you think about where would that guy go in next year's startup if certain things happen. Breece Hall was the 101 in rookie drafts this year. Even if some of the negative elements of his sort of thesis are true, he's not Jonathan Taylor. He's in more of a committee than we want. The Jets offense doesn't look great. The enthusiasm that had him at the 101 this year is not going to completely dissipate by next year. It could be bad, but I don't think it would be awful. And so one of these things that, again, like it is an important consideration. I talked about it with the guy who gave up his 2023 1 and 2 and moved some of those future picks to get up to Chase and Jefferson. At least he was taking Chase and Jefferson, right? So if things go wrong, those guys are going to have value a year from now at their age and what they've already done. Look at like a Juju who was incredible and then started struggling. I was trading really good assets for Juju after his first down year because I was like, oh, now's a buy low window, right? And so you say Jefferson and Chase have a really bad year. At their age, they're still going to seem like buy lows to several people. They're still going to have considerable value. So there's that element of, it's sort of the inverse of how we draft and redraft sometimes. And I've had to kind of rewire my brain to come around to this. But in redraft, for me, it's like all upside. You know, I don't really care if the player can bottom out. There's no long-term risk. What are you going to, you're going to have misses and you deal with that in that 1 year. In Dynasty, that bottom out risk is a pretty significant thing. Every time I talk to you guys and when I keep learning is this idea that even as you were sitting there talking about the merits of Breece Hall in 2022 or what his career could be, I know a big element of that is not that you think Breece Hall is going to be better than Cooper Kupp this year, or else we would draft him in the first round of redraft, or you don't think he's going to be better than CMC or even Mark Andrews in tight end premium, but it's that Breece Hall at his age and at his profile and being the rookie 101 this year has enough clout in the fantasy community that even if 2022 is bad, and there's been a lot of research, you reference Pat's old work on this all the time, as a 21-year-old rookie running back coming in, he's probably not going to lose value. And you can then trade him next offseason and not have it be a catastrophic thing to your long-term dynasty team. I think that's a really important consideration. It took me a while to learn with dynasty, is just this idea of how bad can it get if I'm wrong. The younger players, it's always less bad.
And with Hall, I mean, you're thinking about those negative scenarios, and it really would need to be something like a combination of the worst parts of Harris and the worst parts of Javonte Williams, where you're both inefficient and you're mired in this committee, and maybe even something else to knock him down quite a bit. And even then, right, you're going to have this sort of bounce back scenario where, when you think about what Trent Richardson's value was after his down rookie season, there are going to be chances to get back out, but also there are bounce back scenarios to where he could actually just do very well for you. And so, like Breece Hall, Cooper Kupp, one where a little bit like the Trevor Lawrence CMC scenario gave, I think that's another one where it's maybe more appealing in a slightly more mature league, even just the second year, where you think about the team that we have in the RV Triflex. If we had a good offer for Cooper Kupp, we would have to look at that really seriously, right? Because at this point, we've already built in now the depth and the youth to where if we wanted to also then feather in one superstar who's a little bit older, that's fine, because we now have guaranteed ourselves the amount of youth and future value that pick can't hurt us that much, and it could help us a ton. But the startup is your chance to actually build that, and so you have to take advantage of it in the startup, because you're not going to be able to do the same things with Kupp. Number one, because you made a pick as opposed to moving down, and then number two, how that works within the context of the rest of the draft. I mean, the very fact that he's there still gives you at least a little bit of sense of how people are going to value him. Now, there are still very good players left in that draft, obviously, and we've talked about that, but I like him as somebody that if you've built this extremely deep, and it would be even preferable in like a 30 roster spot league as opposed to a 20 roster spot league, because then you can definitely add him to your roster and the consequences are minimal if you've got a young team with future rookie value. And so don't think of it in terms of we can't ever have these guys. When you're trying to build this dynasty, you want to score more points than the other team, and you just want to be aware of the price and aware of the situation when you add those guys in. I mean, Cooper Kupp could go out there and score 23, 24 points per game again this season and be the reason that you win the league. And so we don't want to diminish the value of that as well.
Yeah. I mean, again, like we were saying, at a certain point, it gets very interesting. And I was looking at Cooper Kupp quite a bit. And look, if he continued to fall into the third round, like at what point do you, like, obviously you have to consider the value of that. But like you said, that is most valuable when you can essentially just ride him out. I remember that's something that Fantasy Douche, or a RotoViz founder, that we talk about stuff that he wrote about years ago from time to time. He would talk about that with Calvin Johnson a lot, where essentially Calvin Johnson was an elite player until he retired, and he retired early. And so that was disappointing for dynasty managers. But you weren't going to get anywhere close to fair trade value is sort of the way that Fantasy Douche would put it. And so you are in a position where it doesn't make sense to move him because he's so productive. And so you're just riding that to zero, basically. And again, that did not pan out very well for Calvin Johnson managers in Dynasty because he did retire so early. But if you, like you said, have already accomplished the roster where you have enough youth and you have enough pieces, getting the immediate production that you can ride to zero essentially on a Cooper Kupp, and using the rest of it to still have value into future years and have a roster that can be competitive and perpetually reload, as where I was talking about, makes perfect sense. Then you're just even better in year one. And this is something where, we talk about this a lot. You don't just want to have only young players. I mean, we've made these moves on our team. We ended up taking Michael Thomas at a certain point last year and Odell Beckham, and we're thinking about removing them, but we were also saying, hey, maybe we can kind of productive struggle, but win in year one. I mean, maybe we went and got Kyler, and we're like, maybe this team can be good enough to win. You mentioned we ended up making the playoffs and even without Michael Thomas, but we did have some productive players. But this is something that I was going to say, as we talk through it, we maybe don't hit on enough, this idea of when is it time to actually get some real production on your roster. And so I think that was a really good point about Kupp. You can get in the case when you're Shawn, especially, that he described with his Devy League, where he's going to have more than half of his roster be college players, and he has Patrick Mahomes. And I mean, that's very fun, but certainly you could go a little bit too far, probably, right? I mean, is that too far?
There's no such thing.
There's no such thing as too far.
Thing. You can't ever be too far.
We won't tell you there's too much thing as too far on this show, but probably using some of that type of firepower, if you're in that type of situation, not necessarily Devy, but with future picks and things, to then be super competitive in the first couple of years and still have the long-term value, like you were just describing with a team that might acquire Cooper Kupp. Maybe other people would say that's smart.
Well, I think the great point there, and again, we started out the show by mentioning a team that had traded back and had these picks now in round 9 and round 10. One of the things that you will find, I think the key thing with drafting the veterans in a startup is just make sure you do it at the right spots, right? It's going to be so tempting to take the Kupp and, depending Christian McCaffrey, Travis Kelce, but the huge values that you get come at the very next level down. And you mentioned the Odell Beckhams and the Michael Thomas, when you're talking about 8, 9, 10, you said we got some productive veterans. Those guys actually didn't do anything, but the names were good. They were retradable as it turned out, even after that year. And there was a scenario where it would have worked out. And that's the scenario that you kind of want to play, the one that's much, much less expensive and the one that you can do after you've traded down. So